One of the joys of work can be working as part of an effective, diverse team. And certainly diverse teams can produce far greater results and far higher levels of performance than other teams. Plenty of research shows that diverse, multicultural teams can also perform a lot more poorly than homogeneous, consistent teams from a single culture when they are led poorly. I'll be making a short series of videos about multicultural teams. In this video, I want to introduce you to some of the basic ideas. The blurring of the lines between individual differences and cultural differences between team members can often be the source of frustration and resentment. Managing and leading a multicultural team is largely about making sure that that doesn't happen, and then creating the circumstances where everyone feels welcome and able to fully participate as themselves. But the truth is that there is a shortage of skilled multicultural leaders who have the ability to bridge these differences. And indeed, I'd say there's also a shortage of team members with high levels of cultural competency. And what we find is that in the absence of effective multicultural leaders, we see an erosion of rapport, goodwill, and ultimately trust. What we often find is that what are really cultural differences are all too often ascribed to individual personalities, or worse still, individual failings. People get blamed for things that are entirely outside of their control because it's just how they grew up. As a result, relationships are undermined and team performance can plummet. In understanding cultural differences, it's a helpful metaphor to think of culture as an iceberg, with only 10% of the most obvious cultural differences easily visible. Things like language, dress, accent, and the numerous cultural symbols that we often carry around with us. However, under the waterline, invisible to all but those who are attuned to seeing it, are many, many more important cultural differences, which get in the way of us properly understanding one another unless we acknowledge them and work with them. These invisible differences below the waterline are most often about attitudes. Attitudes to things like hierarchy or timekeeping, individualistic versus group orientation, willingness to be outspoken, and levels of desire for either control on the one hand or harmony on the other. There's attitudes towards centralization or decentralization, focus on outcome or relationships, or indeed something as fundamental as tolerance to risk. All of these get in the way of members of the team properly understanding one another unless they recognise these differences and where they come from and are able to accommodate them. But of course, without good leadership, this is almost impossible. And what we see in the world is a graph something like this. On the left-hand end of the graph, we see very low levels of team effectiveness among poorly led cross-cultural teams. At the far right of the graph, we see that cross-cultural teams that are led well have the highest level of effectiveness, but this is also very rare. By far the commonest kind of team are fairly homogeneous teams that have very low levels of cultural diversity. Those are relatively easy to manage, but even at their best, they're only going to have one degree or another of fairly middling average performance. If you want exceptional performance, you have to introduce diversity to your team. The challenge is that introducing diversity to your team can lead team performance to one extreme or the other, to the extreme of low performance if it's led poorly, or to the extreme of exceptional performance if it's led well by a culturally sensitive leader. Of course, working in cross-cultural teams can leave us with some very challenging situations where you perhaps have a strong level of disagreement with the cultural norm of one of your colleagues. These are difficult questions, and the first step to being a successful cross-cultural leader is to recognise that these questions will arise, to recognise when these questions will arise, and to deal with them sensitively. And often there is no single right answer. Sometimes you're working within a prevailing culture, and you can expect that if someone has signed up to work within that culture, they need to at least outwardly respect the norms of that culture. But sometimes it's just a matter of the personal opinions we have as a result of the culture within which we grew up. Individuals do need to act respectfully to one another, regardless of whether or not they respect the opinions of each other. All of this, of course, leads to a need for more investment in team members and more investment in team leaders learning about cross-cultural working and the skills it takes to lead effectively a cross-cultural team. Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. There's loads more great management courses content to come, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of that content. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep learning.